So do we want to get into Shannon? I know you wanted to talk about the Argus pheasant at some point.
I did
Oh,
want
go
to
ahead.
talk about it for probably what's going to seem like a bizarre reason to you, because one of the things that bothers me the most about this book, and I really enjoy it, but is the repeated statement that a, a specimen without a tag has no value, and that I don't agree with at all. It certainly has less value, but it has value. And my illustration of this is going to come in a second. So I was transfixed by the idea of this of Edwin Rist as a 14-year-old. So this is on page 76 of the printed book that I have access to. I don't know if it's on different page numbers and different versions, but he's being introduced to this McLean site as a place where bird feathers are being sold, and he gets to an Argus pheasant, and this is how it's described. The Argus pheasant, a near threatened bird that roams the lowland hill forests of the Malay Peninsula, is prized by fly tyers for its 30-inch quills that are marked with olive-colored eye spots known as ocelli. Linnaeus named the species after Argus pantopes, the hundred-eyed giant from Greek mythology that never slept. McLean sold the feathers for $6.95 an inch, making a single quill worth more than $200. And when I read that, if you look up pictures of an Argus pheasant, you'll know why they're so attractive. But Argus pheasant, so I'm connecting it to modern things, which is there's lots of really interesting things about Argus pheasants. You should go look at videos of their displays. In fact, they're so kind of open with their displays. There's pictures all over zoos, videos all over zoos of them displaying around the feet of people. Um, but anyways, that the thing that's never mentioned in any of these accounts is that the rachis of the wing feather of Argus feathers are blue. And it's the only example of blue in the rachis of a feather. Most blues, as we've talked about before, are structural colors. So the barbs and barbules make them both blue and iridescent. So wherever the keratin and melanin and all and the air are all deposited makes blue light come back to your eyes. And interestingly, the blue shade can vary depending on the angle that you look at the bird in. So if we were to show you a bluebird in the museum, it could look a different kind of blue, and then it could look like the ocean in the Bahamas, depending on the angle that the light takes. But the pheasant, that Argus pheasant rachis feather, is strangely shaped. It's kind of square, which is also unusual, and it's blue. And and that's not mentioned, which I found interesting. So Chad Eliason, who works at the Field Museum, he decided one day he wanted to know why that feather was blue, how it got to be blue, how the rachis got to be blue, because it was so unusual. And so we bought a feather off of,
Mm.
because they're in zoos and stuff. So you can legally buy these feathers. So we bought a feather, and we decided we took it to uh, a specialized facility at Northwestern that could take a look on the top and inside of the feather and try to figure out why it's blue, because that's so unusual. Why isn't something else? There's 11,000 species of birds. Why isn't something else made a blue feather, a blue rachis feather? But the really cool thing is that he learned, and you don't need to have a tag on you for people to understand this, is so he looked in detail at the outside of the feather, and it turns out that the blue comes from these wrinkled keratin. The wrinkly keratin is on the top of that feather. So if you go underneath the feather, down more than a few nanometers, it's just keratin, just normal kind of keratin. But if you look at the top, it's all wrinkly. And it turns out those wrinkles are why that is blue. And so the depth of the wrinkles and the spacing of those wrinkles helps us understand the blue part of this
So it's
feather.
structural color as well, then.
It is. It's a new form, a
Cool.
brand new form of a
Crazy.
structural
Wow.
color. So that bird has been
cool.
described for hundreds of years, right? But nobody's ever looked at why the rachis is blue. And in fact, most accounts don't even talk about the fact that it's blue. They talk about these eyes, which are spectacular. But to me, they were not as spectacular as when Chad showed me this feather and said, "How do you think they make this?" And I'm like, "I don't know. That's your realm." And so, but it took his experience, his connections, and an engineering background to kind of figure out how that blue was being made. So, and if you
Wow.
look at pictures of it, you can see really clearly, kind of looks like a brain, all these wrinkled things, and the depth of the. So, if you apply engineering principles, which Chad can do, if you apply engineering principles, you can see that that blue is what's going to be reflected in the scattered reflection thing, but that the distance between the little wrinkles dictated the wavelength that would come back. So the wavelengths, we can stick a spectrophotometer on and you can see that it's reflecting in the blue and into the ultraviolet blue wavelength. But if you look at, and then he did a comparative analysis in across archosaurs, the things like crocodiles and dinosaurs that are closely related to birds, there is that kind of a structure, that wrinkly keratin structure in the skin of Nile crocodiles. So he looked at that as a comparison, and the reason they're not blue is that they're separated further apart than the separations of the wrinkles in the bird are. So the wavelength that would be produced from that is not visible. It's not in the visible realm, unlike what's happening in the Argus pheasant. So the Argus is known to have these wrinkly keratinized things in its skin, but they don't produce a color because the wrinkles are too far apart.
Well, if they're producing in the UV, maybe they're producing something that
No, it's outside of it's out. Visible light, you human, is not the same as a visible light to a bird whose visible light perceptions are in some wavelength superior to human. And so I just find that that's a really interesting thing.
Cool.
Specimen collected 100, 200, 300 years ago could tell you something now that only the tools we have today could interpret.
Oh, that's very
And
cool.
the other thing is, I think your point about, like, let's say you had an Argus pheasant that didn't have a tag, you could still use it for that question. You might not want to use it for other questions. And I think that's why, like, lots of specimens in our collections have a small amount of data and lots have a lot of data, right? And that just, will determine somewhat what you can do with them, but it doesn't make them useless when they have less data. And the other thing is sometimes you can find the data, right? So it might not be on that tag, but you go into archives, you start looking at historical records, you can figure out where a person went on that day or where they collected, generally in some area, and you can kind of enrich the data that's associated with those specimens. So, that's why I sort of feel like never throw a specimen out that's, sitting in a collection, because you just don't really know.
Yeah. So now that engineering, because people are really, so it goes beyond just the cool nature of understanding how that bird makes a feather. It goes to why they do that too. The interplay between making your feather flat like that is potentially weakens it. So if those wrinkles went all the way through, the feather would be too wrinkly, or it wouldn't be stiff enough and strong enough to support flight. And that's why the depth of that wrinkle is really important, and the keratin underneath that provides the structure. But then it's clear that there's something about pheasants and their displays that prompted that bird to make that blue feather and use it in its display, right? So it's an important science lesson to try to understand the range of possible variation that can exist in a lineage and how certain kinds of selection could act on that. So that's the biology part, but the engineering part goes further, because I guess people are looking at different ways of making things colored, paint-wise, for example. And the way that that feather, the color comes, is that no matter the angle that you take and look at it, the color is the same blue. And that is really unusual too, and has huge implications for engineering and dyeing of cars or whatever. So you can have these structural colors that the angle doesn't make a difference to how it looks. And that again has to do with the nature, the physics of how deep the wrinkles are and how they're distributed, that make it scatter evenly across, the entire surface instead of the way light shines off of a blue normal feather. So to me, that it's just, the story is so cool. And again, science is random, right? Chad takes a look at a feather. Only his mind thinks of why. I got to figure out how that works. Then only technology that happens at Northwestern could let us do that. We have a relationship with Northwestern that lets us use their labs. And of course, people out in normal labs, not in our labs, think that what we do is really super cool. So they're like, oh, of course I want to be involved in that. Of course you can use our facility for that. I didn't know that kind of stuff existed. And then it has implications beyond. So anyways, that's why I picked Argus Pheasant.
That's very cool.
That's
I'll send you
awesome.
the paper.
Yeah.
I want to know. I want to know what a UV image of the bird displaying looks like with those.
Yeah, I did
blue
too.
rack-
Oh,
Rackuses.
wow. That'd be awesome. Yeah.
I did too. And
Actually.
it's hard. You can't do that with a feather. You can't do that with a specimen. You need to, because of the way the wings are folded, and the bird kind of makes like a halo around its head with its wings. And
Yeah,
it
it's a crazy
spreads out
display.
this, this tail that's 3 to 4 feet long. The tail is nutsy cuckoo. But so I think you'd almost need to have someone, I don't know, are there video cameras that can capture UV?
I don't think so. I mean, the reason that most cameras, I know this because my grad student John, who's going to come and visit the Field Museum, studies color. He's done this with parrots and then is studying color in toucans. And we actually have a camera setup. We have 2 camera setups. One is for just visible light for things that we know don't have UV from checking them with the other camera. The camera that measures UV light, we actually had the filter removed from the sensor. So there's a filter over a sensor that all of our cameras have. Probably our cell phones have it too. Because UV light, it actually causes images to be blurry. You get what are called chromatic aberrations, where like, you even get this with visible light if your lenses, like if you have a big telephoto lens and it's not specially coated glass, the different colors of the spectrum focus on different planes, and that leads to fuzziness in an image. So to not get the fuzziness in the image, they cut the UV light out. So we did that with a camera, like a used camera that we bought online that a lot of people have used, and then are using it for some projects, where we're trying to measure that kind of stuff. But I don't know if it shoots fast enough. Like if you're shooting at I think he shoots at slow, like low ISOs, so it may be low shutter speed, so you might not be able to capture like a thing that's doing like its crazy thing.
Yeah, do you have an Argus Pheasant?
We do, yeah.
You should ask him to take some UV images, at least of the wings. We can't tell exactly, but we might get a little hint.
Okay, I'll write that down.
People
That's
didn't
very
know
cool.
what birds of
Cool.
paradise looked like to females until they started climbing in trees with high-speed videos and looking at a male bird of paradise from the vantage view of where the female actually sits. So, and that was really novel, right? Because females aren't looking straight on at these birds. They're looking down on them a lot of the time. And that revolutionized the behavior.
I wanted to bring up something about these birds that I've always found fascinating, and that is when I was a little kid, I used to read the American Birding Association magazine, and I can still remember a guy describing being in the range of these birds and being able to hear a whole bunch of them and not being able to see them. So as big as these birds are and as absolutely wild as their displays are, when they don't want to be seen, they can be really hard to find and get a look at.
That's
Oh, wow.
crazy.
Yeah, and they're they're probably like out in the forest somewhere, right? So they're not like displaying like out in a road or out in some open spot. The ones that are on video are from zoos.
It's interesting that accounts say they don't like riverine habitat. They like the centers of pretty mature forests, at least in some of the places that they're at, which is interesting again too. So and they clear, just like a bunch of birds do, they clear out large areas, every stick, every rock, every twig, everything that gets in the way. They clear it out, and apparently they man that territory in the breeding season 40% of the daylight hours.
Wow.
They are in that arena 40% of the time, which is no wonder they immediately hop to it when a female comes in. It's like, oh my God, I've been waiting here forever. How long do I have to wait here?
Got to take my chance while I have it.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean,
Shannon, where are these birds?
and you can find them in the Malay Peninsula, in Borneo,
Okay.
Sumatra, places like that. There's 2 different subspecies, but they have been split and lumped as species or not in the past. Then there's this really cool story about a feather, an aberrant feather that was found. I didn't know this until Chad forced me to get obsessed with Argus pheasant feathers. But there was a feather that was single feather, part of a feather actually, that was found, and it was described as a different species because the feather is weird. It's kind of symmetrical. Most bird feathers are asymmetrical, the wing feathers. It helps with maintaining loft in flight. But this feather was symmetrical. The eyes on both sides of the rachis were symmetrical. And it was described initially as a separate species, and then it was described as an extinct species. And then people are like, I don't know.
One feather.
Part of one feather.
That's all they had.
I don't even
That's
think it was the
amazing.
whole
Wow.
feather. But then, more modern times, people looked at it and decided that nobody's ever seen that feather anywhere, ever, in any specimen,
Jeez.
on the floor of any forest anywhere. So they think it was an aberrant growth pattern in a feather. So, and it turns out people who have looked, none of the specimens in museums have feathers that kind of look like that. So that's a scientific mystery solved in
Wow.
modern times with comparative
That's
material. So
Crazy. Very cool.
I imagine there were some heated arguments about that at the time. If I had to lay bets on that, I would lay that bet down.
Knowing avian systematists as we do.
Yeah.
Exactly.
The most trivial thing is something worth arguing over. So
Well,
that's why I picked Argus pheasant. It had more to tell than just Edwin Rist calculating how much a single tail feather might fetch in the black market of fly feather tie purchasing.
Also, he would have needed like a giant cart to carry out the Argus pheasants, probably instead of just his suitcase. It would have been a little harder to smuggle it out the window or whatever he did.
So how big are they? Are they like the size of a turkey almost, or
So they're bigger. They're longer than a green peafowl or a peacock, common peacock.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
okay.
they're really long birds.
I mean, their
Bodies.
their
Wow.
tails are 3 to 4 feet long.
okay?
Wow.
So, and they use those tails in their displays. It's wild to watch their displays. Absolutely wild.
Yeah, the little ocelli are really crazy too. Rick Prum gave a talk about them too. Like the ocelli are, they change in size up the tail feather.
That's right.
And
They get
I think
smaller.
and I think the angle that they hold it at makes them look as if they're all perfectly equal in size when the female's looking at them. It's some kind of weird,
Oh, cool.
yeah, it's craziness.
That's so cool.
That's some strong natural selection right there.
Yeah.
Talk about
Right.
obsessed, right? Those birds must be
Sexual
obsessed.
selection. Yeah.
Yeah, sexual
Yeah.
selection. Yeah, sorry. Well,
Well,
I
if
didn't
this
get that right.
displays,
Both.
if the displays are important enough to make a feather be advantageous in a way that no other bird feather has been advantageous, then, the optical illusion of that is not surprising, I guess.
Yeah.
It's the evolutionary version of, is the dress blue, or is the blue and black, or gold and white?
Oh, yeah, that one. Yeah.
In which do you prefer?
Right. Right. Exactly. Which do you like better?
Well, that depends on your eyes, right? Because some people actually only see that dress as gold and white. and others.
I only see it one way, Shannon.
Which do you see?
Do you see it both? I don't remember which one I see. Do you see it both though? I
It's
always
blue
thought
and
it
black
was.
to me, and some people never see blue and black. I mean, I can force
Mm.
myself to see the white, and a lot of that depends on kind of how you sleep at night and where your eyes are tuned to seeing the most. I got obsessed with that
Crazy.
too, because the whole idea of human perception of something that has an objective reality, right? That dress is blue and black. The people who made it that way, but the idea that your experience looking at the exact same thing could be so completely different depending on your sleep patterns and the angle the light might take at a piece of fabric is just, to me, that's just wild.
Yeah. That's crazy. I always thought people only saw it one way. I didn't realize you could like change the way that you're viewing it.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
So,
Thankfully, there aren't too many things like that.
How do you know? How do you know? We don't know what that
I'm-
Argus pheasant looks like to other Argus pheasants yet.
Fair enough.
Jason, I wanted to ask you, I have an opinion on like, or I guess I wanted to share an observation, just get your thoughts. I started fly fishing before I started bird watching, and I really haven't been fly fishing since I've been in Illinois, and that's where I've started bird watching. And my impression, like when RJ and I are out bird watching and we encounter someone else who's also bird watching, like there's tons of information sharing, and like people will actually like point out like what they're looking at. And when I'm on a river fishing, it's like completely different. like people are very secretive and do not like to share. That's
It
a
could
big
go. It
reason
could
I
go
like to
either
go to
way.
fly shops.
It could
yeah.
go either way. I mean, actually, 2 years ago on the Catskills, I went into this pool, which is one of my favorite pools on the Beaverkill River, and there were giant fish everywhere. And I walk by this older man, and he catches like 2 fish in a row, 2 huge brown trout, and I cannot get a thing. I'm like, so what are you getting them on? And he goes, if I make it easy on you, it won't be, worth your while, or something like that. He like made something, and you can imagine what I was thinking at that moment. I was like,
Yeah, like
I just want him to tell me what fly is he catching him on. I'll find it in my
Exactly.
box, and then
That's when I go to shore, find a paddle, and come back and just club one right in front of me.
yeah. I thought you were gonna say you clubbed the guy.
I know.
I'm going for the fish. I want to pull the fish out.
The funny thing is, I did not catch a trout that night, but there was a fish rising near me, and I put this little caddis fly, this little teeny dry fly, and I tossed it to the thing, and it slurped down my fly, and I hooked it, and I pulled it in and netted it, and it was a smallmouth bass, which they're kind of introduced in a lot of the river systems here, and I mean, I love catching smallmouth bass. They're as much fun. I love fly fishing for them, but when I'm there, I'm fishing for trout.
Yeah.
So he said, "Hey, I saw you finally caught one." I said, "Yeah, it was a smallmouth bass." Thanks for not helping me.
Yeah.
So are you planning on using your knife cutter and some gloves to cut the window out of his house and then go in and steal his
Yeah,
fish?
exactly.
I was thinking he's on some other podcast about fly fishing, talking about this guy that couldn't figure out how to catch bass. And,
or had the gall to ask. Yeah.
I mean, the funny thing is, once you go to a place a bunch of times, you start learning. Like, now I know what they're eating at that time of night, at that time of year. I know exactly what flies I should put on to increase my chances of catching fish. So it's like the more you go back, now I could catch just as many as he was catching that night. But that was like my first time in that pool, and I was like, I can't catch a single fish. And there were huge fish coming up. Their tails would come out of the water, and I was just like, oh my god.
Oh my gosh. That's awesome. Oh yeah.
Jason would never say that to another fly fisherman or woman.
I mean, sometimes I've had things where people are super friendly, and they'll they'll tell you like what they're catching them on. They'll even give you a fly out of their box. So
Oh,
it can go either
wow.
way. And
That's really nice.
and
Yeah.
it can end up in a geeky conversation just like birding, where everyone's, I just caught 5 in this pool and 10 in that pool. Just like, I just saw a Kirtland's warbler here and that, it's the
That's
same kind of
awesome.
silly stuff. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. I was gonna say in Colorado, I was telling them last time we talked, I fooled around a little bit with fly time, but like I usually just went to the shop, and I would recommend anyone who's like starting to fly fish, just go to the shop.
Oh yeah.
Because they'll tell you where to go, what to do. And like in Colorado, and I my only point of reference is Steamboat, there's flies that are they're only alive for a day. So it's like, if you want to fly, if you want to fish on that, you're not going to know what's going on that particular day. Like, it's like that many days. So it's like, it's nice when you can talk to somebody and they tell you.
Yeah, they'll tell you like, this is
you know.
hatching, that's hatching, and that's
Yes.
hatching. At this time in the afternoon, you're more like, and also they're selling some flies, right? They're making some bucks off of you.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're supporting them. You're keeping
Yeah.
them alive.
And I have
but
my favorite, I have a
not in-
fly shop down the street from me that's, it's about 15 minutes away down the road. That's a pretty big fly shop, which is pretty nice. But then the places that I go often, like, especially around Yellowstone, like I love Blue Ribbon Fly Shop in Yellowstone. In fact, I used to store bear spray there. I'd buy bear spray, and then I would leave it in the shop and come back,
That's awesome.
the next year and use the same bear spray. They'd keep it down their basement, for me.
That's
Aw.
awesome.
Yeah.
It's a good shop.
Yeah, it's a
So-
great shop. And I still order stuff from them sometimes.
What are fly fishing competitions like then?
I don't know. I've never really participated in one, but they, like there are people that do, like they call it like, competition fly fishing. It's how many fish do you catch? There are even ones where it's like one fly competitions, like you get to use one fly. You don't have your box of, 50 zillion things. And a lot of that it's called nymphing. They're using like a fly that imitates, the nymphal stage of a mayfly, for example. So it's under the water. There are all these little niche, Euro nymphing, dry fly, there are different kinds of casting, spay casting that uses a different kind of rod. Like for steelheads out in British Columbia, they use these huge long rods, and they're spay casting. They can cast a really long distance on these big rivers. I don't know how to
and then
spay
you
cast.
can catch it in trees and all kinds of things too.
Oh, you
Yes,
do.
That's that's what I'm the best at.
Yeah. Trees, you get lots of
Getting
tangles.
snagged.
And then when you get old and your eyes suck, like the light starts getting dim and you can't get the tippet material, the little leader through the hole in
Yeah.
the teeny fly.
Yeah.
That's what
Yeah.
your
To learn
cell
tricks
phone
for
is
all that.
useful for now. That's why you don't go anywhere like that without your cell phone. Because you can light it up and to see a lot
Yeah.
better.
Yeah, you have to have a headlamp with you for a lot of things.
Then when you drop
know.
your cell phone in the river, you're in big trouble.
Yeah.
Well, I did that once.
Oh no.
I had my phone in. This is before, now the iPhones are waterproofish. You could drop them in the river and it wouldn't really. And people even put them under the water sometimes to take like underwater images. I'd be a little nervous
my
to do that,
gosh.
but I had a waterproof case for my phone that I, because I used it in the rainforest too. I was like, just gonna put it in this waterproof case. And I was on the Madison River outside Yellowstone with a friend, and we were stalking these trout. And then I just pulled my phone out to snap a couple shots of the river where we were. And it was sort of a little shallow kind of bend in the river away from the main stream. Like there was a little island in front of us. So it wasn't too deep, fortunately. And I went to put the phone in the little pocket in front of my waders. And I went like this, and it slipped out the front. And I let go, and it go bloop, right into the water. And I was like, holy crap. And, so I'm looking on the bottom. I cannot see the phone anywhere. It just blended in with the rocks. So I was like, Tim, we got to find my phone. It's somewhere here. And we kind of walked back and forth. And, the current was strong enough that it could have taken it down a few feet.
Yeah.
And eventually, like after about 5 or 10 minutes, I went back to the spot and I saw this little silver apple on the back of the iPhone.
Oh,
I'm like, there it
thank
is. And I
God.
grabbed it,
Yeah.
touched it, and the screen came on. And I was like,
Oh.
the waterproof
Relief.
case works. And I had that was like the last couple of days of the trip. So I had like a trip worth of pictures on it. It would have been
Tons of
depressing.
pictures.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Oh my gosh. I belong to Trout Unlimited.
Oh, cool.
It's this great conservation organization, and in the December issue they had this article. It was called "A Quaint and Harmless Hobby," and it was all about fly tying. It was actually a column, and it was just this. It's actually the author of Trout Bum. He wrote this column.
Oh, cool.
And I thought because the title of the article is "A Quaint and Harmless Hobby," I was curious if it was like something ironic, like related to what we were talking about.
Yeah.
Like how it's not harmless at all in some instances. This was actually just talking about the joy and the experience of a fly tying. And I circled our section that I wanted to read to you guys. He said, "I try to make the best flies I'm capable of, but my goal as a tyer is no longer perfection, if it ever was. Once I decide how a pattern should be, its proportions, color, texture, and sense of either elegance or folk art funkiness, I want them all to be that same way, but I recognize that they're expendable. Like money, food, or firewood, flies are useless until you use them up." So I thought that was really cool.
That's great.
Yeah, and kind of like how you live, Jason. Yeah,
Yeah.
like you're giving them to friends. I would never do
Oh, yeah.
that.
Yep.
Amanda, I thought you were the nice one.
No, I mean, no, that's how good Jason is. Yeah.
Some people get into it because they think they're going to save money, and initially that's what I did. I was like, oh, there was a little pattern that we were using that looks like a worm. And I was like, that's so easy. It's a little piece of chenille with some thread. I could tie a zillion of those, and why pay $3 each one, right? And that one's one where you could save money. But once you go down the rabbit hole, you're not going to save money. The hooks are expensive. I mean, but it's so much fun. It's a worthy investment in stuff because it's fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That is awesome, man. Jeez, it's been fun talking with you.
Yeah, it's fun talking to you guys too. I've been enjoying the
This has been
podcast.
awesome.
I want to have you back. We should do some toucans. I think of you
Oh,
when
that'd
I
be
think
great.
of doing new species.
Yeah, I love toucans, as you both know. Yeah, we're doing some cool stuff with toucans too. So, well, John will probably talk about it. John asked if we could give some kind of a presentation when we come, and John Merwin is a great speaker, and he's doing cool stuff with eBird data to look at color. He's like reconstructed all kinds of cool, old time patterns that people had looked at, but with modern data. So pretty cool.
Aren't students awesome?
Yes, they're way smarter than I am. So
That's right.
they're doing all the things I dreamed of doing, but I had no idea how to do any of it. And also some of it wasn't
awesome.
possible.
Yeah.
Like you couldn't sequence a genome, now you can sequence a genome for a few $100.
Oh.
I always tell people that being around graduate students ages me in reverse.
Yep.
So
It does.
they keep
yeah.
me young. They keep my brain moving.
Yep.
And actually, I like them so much. They make me hopeful for the future in a way that looking at other 60-year-olds don't. So
Depends on how fast they ask you to read something.
yeah, fair.
I was probably guilty of making you read lots of things, lots of grant proposals.
You were never bad.
Jason is uber prepared for everything he does. Like his lists of before an expedition are legendary.
Very cool.
We-
Very cool.
We still use them.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny. That's awesome.
awesome.
Yeah, I still use that same set of lists.
Well, thanks so much for coming on, Jason. This
Yeah.
has been so awesome.
Yeah.
Definitely
Yeah,
have you
thank
back
you.
on, and
Sounds great.
We appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys inviting me. A lot of fun.
Yeah.
And that laugh is the most missed things about Jason.
Oh yeah, they told us about that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's great to
Yeah.
hear it.
Yeah, you weren't kidding, Shannon. That's Jason. I love your laugh.
Yes.
Funny.
Yeah.
Well,
All right.
hopefully I'll see you guys
thanks.
all soon.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Sounds good.
Thanks,
Thanks.
Jason.
Thanks.
Take care.
See you guys.